They called it the Great Miami Hurricane. I'll never forget that morning in September of 1926. The storm destroyed Miami. Most of us colored folk lost everything. I can still hear the screams of mothers calling out for their children and husbands. Our substandard housing was quickly demolished. But the worst was when the police forced all our husbands and even our young girls at gunpoint to leave our homes to help clean up the properties of them white folk.
In fact, reports were coming in that people were being lynched, bodies riddled with bullets, even burned. Remember, this is the Jim Crow period. Jim Crow is an elaborate system of laws and customs that relegated people of African descent to the bottom of the social and political ladder.
Now, this is my church. This is a parish hall.
Born in the 1920s, Thelma Gibson experienced firsthand the layers of Jim Crow's hardship.
Everybody knew there were two sides of Coconut Grove.
We knew we were in Colored Town, and we knew in White Town, and we knew certain things we couldn't do in White Town. We had to drink out of the colored fountains. The water was colored in white fountains, so we had the colored water. If we went downtown, the only place you could go to the bathroom would be the courthouse. We couldn't eat at lunch counters. So things were already that way, but you knew it, and you were taught to stay in your place. You don't push yourself to try to get into where white folk don't want you.
The neighborhood where Gibson grew up was really a web of shotgun shacks. These are one-story wooden houses, simply built, but with no amenities, oftentimes no running water, no screens to keep out mosquitoes. It could be a tough existence. A few miles north of Coconut Grove, you found Colored Town, or present-day Overtown. It got its name because people traveled over town to go to church or over town to go shopping. Overtown represented the heart of Black Miami. It was a place of businesses and community, and also a place that Enid Pinckney remembers as being one of tight family bonds.
The families were particular about their children and were very emphatic about getting a good education, going to school, and furthering their education.
Dr. Enid Pinckney was born in 1931. She remembers one evening when she, her mother, and her father were returning home from church. He was driving with his bright lights on, and they were stopped by the police.
The policeman told him to take his hat off. My father asked the policeman what law was he violating by keeping his hat on. And that incensed the policeman, that this black man would question him. So he hauled off and slapped him and knocked his hat to the ground.
He was very angry.
And then the policeman said to my mother, do you think you can calm him down? So my father said to the policeman, don't speak to her. You deal with me, you slapped me, you disrespected me. The police said, well, you give me no alternative but to take you to jail.
The police put Mr. Pinckney in the patrol car and drove away. No one knows exactly what was said, but after several hours, the police returned him to his family and his daughter Enid.
And he believed that he should stand up for what he thought was right. And as I look back on it, I feel that if he could do that back then I need to do something now to make things better.
Historian Marvin Dunn also stood up against Jim Crow, but this time it was on a bus, as he remembers.
Once the bus left Miami, I moved up into the middle of the bus, which was forbidden. But it felt good. It felt different once I moved to the middle of the bus. But that night, white people got on that bus and they were sitting behind me. And the next morning, there were some white high school kids using the bus to get to school. And a white girl sat down right next to me. I was 17 years old. I'd never been that close to a white person. And as soon as that child sat down next to me, you could hear a pin drop on that bus.
A young white boy on the bus eventually stood up and yelled racist remarks at Dunn.
No, you never forget that kind of insult. It pierces the heart.
Such was the experience of being black under Jim Crow. The city of Miami even required that black workers use racial ID cards to explain their presence on the white side of town. They had to register with the police. And if you didn't have your card on you when stopped either by law enforcement or by an everyday white citizen, you can expect any manner of harassment or violence.
You know y'all knew about that 10 p.m. curfew. And if you were found in White Town after then, woo, you know we might not be seeing you again.
It didn't matter if you were from the West Indies or the American South, if you were a physician or someone from the middle class or a domestic or a gardener. The indignities were felt all the same.
Racism, terror, and threats are familiar to us colored folks. But that didn't stop us. At one point, we gathered our tax receipts together. We marched down to that tax man's office to show proof that we paid taxes and deserve city services.
Ultimately, Virginia Key Beach would be established through the use of tax receipts, physical evidence that black Miamians were paying for amenities that they simply were not getting. Being black in Miami meant experiencing danger from the environment itself. Children who wanted to retreat from the heat of the summer would sometimes look for rock pits at construction sites that held rain runoff. They would swim, oftentimes among dangerous snakes or construction debris. More than a few would lose their lives to snake bites, drowning, or other kinds of physical dangers.
A lot of kids swam in rock pits where they dug into the ground to do construction of buildings. They left these vast holes in the ground, and with beautiful aqua water coming up, but they were dangerous places to swim. Why were they dying in rock pits? Because they were not allowed to be in places where white people were using the water.
But we were and remain resilient. Through racism and cruelty, we have stood our ground, outsmarted our oppressors, and set a plan in motion to provoke change. When it comes to achieving beach access, equality, and rights, we're just getting our feet wet.
This was the moment. May 9th, 1945. A group of black Miamians descend on whites-only Haulover Beach. Now, you may have heard of a sit-in where activists go to a lunch counter and take up space in order to fight for equality. Call this a wade-in. This is where folks entered the water and swam in order to desegregate a whites-only beach. Bystanders were sitting with their mouths agape. Something as simple as swimming created a political firestorm in Miami. Ira Davis, who was considered by some to be the mayor of Black Miami, his home was called the Little White House because it was such an important place of political activity in the city. You had people like Judge Henderson, a labor organizer who worked with the longshoremen. You had Lawson Thomas, who became the first judge in the South since Reconstruction and also a critical legal strategist. And you had John Comer, an appropriate leader for those looking to bring a sense of spirit into the challenge for civil rights, as well as Eugenia Bell. She was the head of the PTA, the first black woman to do so, and she eventually went on to marry Lawson Thomas, the two of them, again, making a tremendous impact across the city for years to come.
Judge Lawson Thomas is actually slated to have brought money to the wade-in and actually said for everybody who got arrested, we were ready to bail them out.
The wade-in at Haulover Beach was tense, but it was a peaceful exchange on both sides.
The county sheriff did not want to arrest him. There had been essentially negotiations that were going on and clearly did not want them arrested because it would potentially hurt tourism. Lawson Thomas knew how to both consult, negotiate, and then essentially have demonstrations. So he used a number of tools in his toolbox to get what he wanted.
County officials designated Virginia Key Beach as the first colored-only beach in all of South Florida. It's important to appreciate that colored-only was a marker of pride at this time. It helped to bring together folks from across the Black diaspora. Picture it. As many as 300,000 people went to Virginia Key Beach every year. And in fact, on Easter Sunday, you could find as many as 5,000 people participating in pre-dawn religious services. It is important to see Virginia Key Beach as a spiritual, economic, and political foundation for all of Black Miami. It was also a place where Ebony magazine saw fit to highlight the benefits of Black tourism. It was an extraordinary achievement. But this was not the first time that Black folk could access the Atlantic Ocean. Go all the way back to the age of Dana A. Dorsey in the 19-teens. Dorsey was Miami's first Black millionaire, and with his money, he bought Terminal Island, hoping to set up a Black resort, a dancing pavilion, some kind of infrastructure for colored Miami to enjoy. But in the early 1920s, he ran into Carl Fisher, an aggressive real estate developer. Fisher bought Terminal Island from Dorsey, renamed it Fisher Island, which is now one of the most valuable stretches of real estate in all of Miami, and made sure that Black folk could not get back on the island anytime in the foreseeable future.
African Americans were still there into the late 1920s, and in many ways, they were all over a lot of the islands for a number of years, but under the radar, so to speak, because they were not legally allowed to go swimming in Biscayne Bay.
In this memo from Carl Fisher, you can see that he didn't want African Americans on Fisher Island. He wrote, quote, "You can tell the Negroes if they can find some other place which they can fix up for themselves, we will donate some cash to help them fix up another place," unquote. Now, D.A. Dorsey came to South Florida by way of Georgia as part of Henry Flagler's crews building the Florida East Coast Railroad. There would be no Miami the way we know it today without the railroad. But it's also true that the railroad in many respects laid the color line for the very first time in the city. It helped to launch, for example, Colored Town or Overtown, which became a bustling economic and political center for the region. As this headline from the Miami Herald reads, Overtown was Black Wall Street and the Harlem of the South. In its heyday in the mid-20th century, the Central Negro District was really a magnet for Black entertainers like Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, and Nat King Cole. In nearby Brownsville, you had the Hampton House Motel, where you could find Muhammad Ali or Malcolm X.
The Hampton House was a place where the leaders of Miami met on a regular basis to plan strategies to integrate Miami. It was where Dr. Martin Luther King stayed.
Virginia Key Beach is where you would find any number of luminaries from around the world who would come to Miami and stay. It was also where you found more homegrown institutions like the Black Police Force, established in the 1940s and headquartered in the Black downtown. Now, you may remember Ira Davis among the activists helping to create Virginia Key Beach. Well, his dental office, in fact, served as the first police precinct before this more modern one was built in its stead.
In 1944, we had our first 5 officers to join the force ever in Miami. They weren't given cars right away, right? They had bikes, so they patrolled on actual bicycles. So if they needed to bring in a suspect, they brought him in on the handlebars.
The Black Precinct's community policing, where folks of African descent would patrol their own neighborhood, was effective, to say the least.
It was a 200% decrease in crime. So it was that much of an impact on the community.
Virginia Key Beach was enjoyed by families as far away as Carver Ranches in Broward County and as far south as Richmond Heights, 15 miles below the Black downtown on the peninsula. Richmond Heights, in particular, was an important marker of Black self-determination as well, because it was the place that Black World War II veterans could enjoy suburban housing for the very first time. During its heyday, Virginia Key Beach became a place for all to enjoy. But the effects of Jim Crow lingered. Garth Reeves, the famous newspaperman, describes how you had seaweed and riptides and really constant struggles with maintaining the integrity of the beachfront. He describes further wanting to go to white beaches when they finally opened up when segregation's walls came tumbling down. There was also the lingering problem of economic inequality, and the city of Miami left the beach woefully underfunded until 1982, when it closed the beach completely. But how long would the key be closed? And who would come to its rescue?
I can't breathe all the time. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Mama.
The George Floyd killing was unlike any event that preceded it involving racial violence. The reason for that, in my view, is because people got to see murder being committed in real time, with a man being killed while he's begging for his mama. And I find it absolutely amazing that a common man could move the needle on race relations more than a man who has his own holiday and Nobel Peace Prize. King was merely shot. This man was crucified.
It's hard enough as adults to comprehend these issues. How can we even begin to explain them to children? Most times we make sense of our world, our history, through the telling of stories. And Miami has scores of stories to tell. We tell the story of Overtown, destroyed by the building of I-95 and the 50,000 people displaced there in the late 1960s. We tell the story of the McDuffie riots in 1980, where Liberty City fought back and uprose against the problem of police brutality. We tell the story of gentrification in neighborhoods like Wynwood and Coconut Grove in present-day Liberty City. Gentrification is in some ways an extension of Jim Crow's violence. The police have to oftentimes ramp up their patrols in gentrifying neighborhoods. The evictions that ensue can cause family separations, and oftentimes elders can lose their lives without the appropriate family support. This story of Miami is really a story of still the environment being of great danger to its black residents. But it's also important to tell the history of fight back, and that again brings us back to Virginia Key Beach. You'll recall, Virginia Key Beach was closed in 1982 and had fallen into disrepair. That stretch of seaside was then eyed by developers to be turned into a seaside resort, an eco camp, and an RV park focused on high-end environmental experiences at a cost of $250 a night. Local scholars, activists, environmentalists, and elderly all banded together to preserve the key and its historical value. Greg Bush was at the Miami City Council meeting in '99 and said,
"It should be preserved as a civil rights beach."
The history of Virginia Key Beach, it was Dr. Gregory Bush who called it to my attention that the city of Miami had planned to develop some eco camp because the city needed money, and they were going to turn Virginia Key Beach into this resort. Now, the black people did not know anything about that.
When Greg Bush reached out to me, I reached out to Mrs. M. Atherley Range, our beloved community matriarch. She said, "Well, let me sleep on this and I'll let you know." The next morning, I got a call. "Gene, I think I've got one good fight left in me." "Yes, okay, we got this."
In 1999, a diverse group of citizens rallied together to form the Virginia Key Beach Park Civil Rights Task Force. They really crafted a brilliant argument to try to save the key from redevelopment. It had three components. The first was to use history as a way of making an argument that the Jim Crow history of Virginia Key Beach was valuable for the long-term understanding and future of multicultural Miami. They also used history to use state historic preservation guidelines to prevent developers from using the site. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, they brought people to the fight who had experienced Jim Crow life in Miami firsthand. They were able to share their experiences at city council meetings and really give flesh to the understanding of Jim Crow that many had stopped appreciating. Mrs. Atherley Range was among those elders who helped to shape the argument.
who better to kind of be the most forward face, if you will, than she, because she not only had the courage to speak truth to power just fearlessly, but she was very astute in, shall we say, the strategy of how to do that.
She came to lead the Civil Rights Task Force, and really, she was a walking embodiment of Black Miami's history. She began her work life as a domestic, working in white women's homes. She then went on to establish her own funeral parlor and eventually establish her own bank for Black Miamians to enjoy. She went on even further to a political career in Black Miami, becoming the first Black city commissioner and eventually a presidential appointee under President Jimmy Carter, being appointed to the board of Amtrak. Her presence helped to give gravity to the argument that Jim Crow's history was really Miami's history. Mrs. Range was interviewed in 2002 when the park was still closed.
There are groups who are working to take over Virginia Key Beach, but we're working a little harder. And in a few years, you're going to be able to go to Virginia Key Beach and really enjoy yourself.
And she was right. Their hard work paid off. As captured in this photo from 2008, the park reopened after being closed for nearly 30 years.
I had the honor of having the great big scissors, and we cut the ribbon, and that was, and the park was open. We literally had to close the gate and say, we can't get any more people in. Several people had just tears of joy, you know, and they were just sharing their emotions.
It's important to preserve the history of Virginia Key Beach because there was a time in Miami, everybody needs to know this, there was a time in Miami that there was no place where Black people could go to a beach. People could come here from all over the world and go to a beach, but people born here in Miami couldn't go to a beach.
This is why I could say to young people, you can't give up. I tell people I'm proud, young people, I'm proud of them. While I can't get out there and march with you, I'm behind you because I know the cause is good.
Now that the young people see what's going on, some of them are going to get involved in politics.
They need to vote.
Find the cause and work with the cause.
Our elders fought hard and won to make a difference. Back in 1945, it was an intergenerational group of activists who helped establish Virginia Key Beach in the first place. They organized a wait-in, they brought their tax receipts, and they found a way to lean on Jim Crow system to get the benefits to which they were entitled. In the mid-1990s, again, young and old worked together. They fought for the benefits of public land and found a way to use history in order to preserve a very important piece, really a treasure, of our shared Miami past. Now, we're faced yet again with new challenges as folks are in the streets demanding their civil rights and asking what benefits are they entitled to. Well, there are very concrete things that we can do in learning from our forebears at Virginia Key Beach. We can fight for the benefits of public land, for example. It's important to have a foundation from which to organize our political future. We can also demand our rights as citizens. It was critical then and now to understand that we are entitled to equality and that we've already paid for that equality in our taxes. It's important, too, to honor our history. Sit down with your elders, record what they teach you, and act on it. A politically informed, historical imagination is going to be key to whatever we do going forward. The bottom line is, it now falls to us, really to you, to act on what you've learned and to act on this history. So when are you going to get started?